Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And with me tonight, the Housing Minister, a solicitor before he entered politics, Dominic Raab, the Shadow Home Secretary, Diane Abbott, Bernard Hogan Howe, who joined the police at 22, worked his way up to become Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, a member of the House of Lords, a senior fellow at Harvard, and back in the day, David Cameron's head of policy at Number 10, Camilla Cavendish, and the senior economics commentator for The Guardian, Aditya Chakraborty. Thank you very much. You can, of course, argue from home, our hashtag BBC QT, if you like, going on social media. And I should just say, we are in the borough of Kensington and Chelsea tonight, which is half a mile from the site where nearly a year ago the horrendous fire at Grenfell Tower broke out and over 70 people died. The official inquiry into that fire starts taking evidence in public on Monday, and the cladding of the tower block, there was a report on that today. So we're starting with a question about Grenfell. It's from Lizzie Cho, please.
To what extent was the tragedy at Grenfell the result of putting money before people?
Money before people. Diane Abbott.
The tragedy at Grenfell was partly about the neglect of that part of North Kensington by the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. And certainly the deregulation, looking at the cost of the cladding rather than protecting people also played a part. But because I'm here in Kensington and Chelsea, let me say this. Kensington and Chelsea failed the people of Grenfell. In the days after the fire, it wasn't the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea coming to help people. They depended on volunteers from the churches, from the mosques. And since then, nearly a year later, most of the people made homeless by the Grenfell fire are not in permanent accommodation. A year later, the people of Grenfell, the survivors and the bereaved, had to fight to have panellists on this inquiry. They should never have had to fight. It should have been modelled on the Macpherson inquiry, where you had the judge, but you also had other panellists. And I just want to say, because I'm in Kensington, that the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea have failed the people of Grenfell, failed them at the time of the fire, are failing them now. And I believe it is long overdue that this government sent commissioners in.
We'll no doubt come to some of those issues in questions we've got here. But Dominic Raab, the simple question first. Well, not a simple question, but the straight question. To what extent was the tragedy the result of putting money before people?
I think the tragedy, and it was horrific, and my heart goes out to that community who've been through hell and back. I don't think the causes were quite that simple. I don't think there was any one thing, but the reason we've got a public inquiry is to get to the bottom of the facts. I'm pleased it's been expanded. There are members of Grenfell United here. They made direct representations to me about expanding it, and I think if I read the cri de coeur from the community, it was that they wanted a bit more empathy out of this inquiry, not just a forensic fact-finding mission. And I'm pleased that the Prime Minister has expanded the panel so that that's taken into account. My job, I've come into this in January, so I guess in the midst of the recovery effort, is to put my heart and soul into trying to fix these problems, put the pressure on the council, work with the council, listen to the community. We do have 201 of the 210 households from the Tower or the Walks who have either accepted or moved into temporary or permanent accommodation, but I will not rest until we've got all of them into the homes they need and dealt with all of the other problems and challenges, from the future of the site to the building regulation and the social housing green paper. We've got to get it right.
But putting money before people was what Lizzie asked.
And what I was trying to say is I don't think that there's one single cause of this. I think Kensington and Chelsea have come under huge criticism. I think they need to bear that criticism. But the reason we've got a public inquiry is because we don't know all the facts and we've got to root them out. There are no easy answers to this. I suspect it's quite complex, but we want to know all of the answers to make sure, not that we just walk around saying we learnt the lessons, but that we make sure it never happens again.
All right, you in the second row there.
It's been a year now. When are we going to get any answers from this inquiry? Is it going to take 10 years? Surely the most important thing is to learn what happened and why it should never happen again, not go over for 15 years what we should do.
Bernard Hogan, what do you think about inquiries of this kind? And what do you think of the question, the result of money before people?
I mean, generally, I think public inquiries are the best way to get to the bottom of this type of thing. They do take a long time. The benefit is obviously people have their chance for their say, and they know that things aren't being hidden. So I think public inquiries are good. They can take a long time, and that's not helpful, but I presume that what might happen here is an interim inquiry that gets out the facts. I think that's the starting point, which I think everybody would agree.
What about the issue, yes, of money before people?
In terms of the money before people, I'm not sure. There are two things that, we all saw the terrible things that happened. And the two things that certainly linger for me, one is obviously that the cladding burnt in the way it did. And I think people are talking about how was it fitted as well. And the other thing I can't get out of my mind is why a building that big had one stairway. I was born, similar sort of housing. There was a masonettes, but I had friends who lived in similar tower blocks. And this was in the 60s, 1960s in Sheffield. And even then, tower blocks of 10 stories had 2 stairways. It seems to be a bit arrogant for any engineer or, anybody to say that, well, it will work, you'll be okay. I would, if I was living in a block like that, I would want 2 stairways. And if one gets clogged, you can get down the other. So for me, there were 2 big things. Was that caused by costs or by some engineer who said it would be okay? I don't know. But I think we have to establish that very quickly, because otherwise people who live in these places are worried.
The woman on the gangway there, yes.
You mentioned money before people, and I truly believe that that is the case. Why do I believe that? Well, the amount saved in putting this subpar cladding on that building was 200,000, something like that. How much did Kensington and Chelsea have in their reserves? There you go. So, ultimately, it was always about money. It was never about the people living in that building, ever.
I do, sir.
Dominic described what happened at Grenfell just now as a tragedy. A tragedy is like a natural disaster. A hurricane's a tragedy. It wasn't a tragedy. When you have housing minister after housing minister being warned of the dangers posed by tower blocks like Grenfell, when you have residents who live there putting up extremely articulate publications expressing their deepest fears about what might happen to them, then that's no longer a tragedy. An inferno then becomes an inevitability. Don't forget, we had, just a few years ago, less than 10 years ago, a tower block in Camberwell go up in flames as well. People died then. And again, back then, there were various vows made that never again would this happen. And yet you saw whatever the police total is, 71 men, women, children, burnt to death for what? £2 a square metre. It's not, the one word I would put into your formulation, it's not profits for people, it's profits for poor people. Because let's face it, if these people had been rich, their lives have been so much more valuable to the companies, to the people who are meant to look after them.
Okay. The person in the very back there, yes.
Why are we still in a situation where we are applying willful blindness when it comes to listening to the voices of the people that this affects? These concerns were raised beforehand, and we're still doing that. These systems are broken, and we need to fix them.
Camilla Cavendish.
Yes, I mean, Dominic Raab said earlier that we don't know all the facts, and I was just reflecting on this. I mean, a year, and it's almost a year since the tragedy. It's a very short time if you're grieving, but it's actually a very long time if you're waiting for answers. And I, as an outsider to this, I do feel we need to understand why were those concerns not listened to? We need to understand who made those decisions to put that cladding on the building. And the review that's come out today by Dame Judith Hackett does get to your question of money before people, because it says very clearly there was a race to the bottom in the building industry. And it sounds to me from reading that review as everyone was doing it. And there were subcontractors and subcontractors and subcontractors and people making money all along the way. And we need to know who was responsible. And I don't disagree with Bernard Hogan Howe about the importance of inquiries, but I am surprised it's taken this long to get to some of those basic answers. And the only other thing I would say is that the Hackett review has not suggested banning combustible cladding. I don't personally understand why. I think it's completely obvious. The one thing surely we must do is ban combustible cladding now.
Okay. I'll just come to it. I'll come to it and get the question. We have that exact question from Gilly Evans. Can we just hear from Gilly, please? Gilly
Why
Evans.
not ban the use of combustible cladding in high-rise buildings now?
Why not ban it now? The point Camilla was making. Dominic Raab, why not?
Well, the Hackett review says that we need to be very careful not to focus on the false comfort zone of having a tick box approach where people say, well, one thing's banned, but actually the system as a whole still isn't safe. And what it focuses on, it's an excellent report, is the consistent focus on compliance and enforcement, which was the systemic failures, which meant the building regulations were not fit for purpose.
Could she not have said, just to interrupt you, could she not have said, I want all these things in place, it's got to be properly regulated, and by the way, no more combustible cladding?
I agree with you. There's a balance between prescriptive banning of things, but making sure we do focus, and I think her insight is right, on enforcement and compliance, because we know from civil aviation and systems that work that that's the best. But we've made it very clear that we will proceed to ban combustible cladding, and we're going to consult on the best way to do it. And before everyone says, well, another consultation, another way, the reason we need to do that is because actually it's a very complex area, and the definition of what counts as combustible needs to be very clear in order that the regulations can be enforced. But that was the commitment made today, and I can give Grenfell United, I know have spoken out today about that assurance. We're going to get on with doing it.
Diane Abbott.
It's still concerning that you're talking about going out to consultation. Would you live in a house which was covered in combustible cladding? You could issue a directive today which would give some comfort, not just to the Grenfell people, but to people living in blocks like that all over the country.
Diane,
and the fact that you won't make that directive must lead people to think, how much do you really care?
So first of all, there's no such thing... There's no such thing as a government directive. We need to change the law. Second of all, can you define combustible cladding for me right here and now in a way which is clear? It's a technical issue. It needs to be enforced
71 people
clearly.
that died were not a technical issue, and you need to step up.
And we need to get it right, not just make it a political issue. So my commitment is that we understand the concern. We've listened to the expert review and report, but we will be looking to ban it. The question is the most effective way to do it so that we have effective regulation, not the defective regulation, which is the cause of this in the first place.
Let's hear from some members of the audience. You over there, sir. Yes, on the end.
Hi, I'm an architect, so I looked very carefully into this after the tragedy happened 2 blocks from home. Timber cladding is combustible. In some instances. The definition is critical, and I think we owe those people who died and the people who have survived and the community at large the time to come up with exactly the right new regulations.
So you don't think that simply saying cladding of this type should be banned?
Yeah, I think it should be banned, that definitely, but what else? I think you need to study very carefully what you define as combustible, because if you ban that and there's another tragedy with something that squeaks out of your new definition, we go through this all over again.
What do you say to that, Dan? I'll come to you, Bernard. What do you say to his point?
What I say to you, you say you live quite close
2 blocks.
thereby, so you have met a lot of the people that are
helped.
bereaved and the people that actually survived. And what they want after a year is answers to questions.
Yes.
And for Dominic Raab to say it's all very, very technical, I think there would be more reassurance if the government had said specifically today that we're actually going to ban it. And when the lady that did the inquiry, the Hackett inquiry, when she was asked why she didn't call for it, she said she didn't think it was her job. Well, it's your job, and you need to call for it.
That's not what happened today.
Right. You in the yellow shirt there, yes. Keep your hands up if you want to speak. Yes.
Yeah, hi. There are instances of tower blocks having flammable cladding being brought to attention as early as 2000. If it was such an important thing, why didn't the last Labour government ban it then? Exactly. It would have stopped Grenfell.
Okay.
I think with just two caveats, the two caveats being the woman who's led this inquiry is an engineer and clearly very able, and number two is I doubt anybody in this room has read the report. So I think you ought to, and I suspect the government has seen it. But with that caveat, we're just looking to buy something in London, and I've got the choice to buy. And if I saw something with what looked like flammable cladding, I wouldn't buy it. But I have the choice to the point that someone made up here. So the government's role is to make sure that these choices are made on behalf of people who can't afford that choice. And I hear what Dominic says, but I think it would have been a far clearer statement to say we've decided we're not going to have flammable cladding, and now we're going to decide how to do it. Whereas I think what people are hearing is we're not sure whether we're going to ban flammable cladding. And it's how to that is the important
Well, I hope I've clarified that. And by the way, I have read the report from top to bottom.
The woman in the middle there, yes.
The school directly underneath Grenfell Tower, KAA, which is the Kensington and Aldridge Academy, 1,200 children go to the school. It is covered in cladding. The children are expected to go back to the school this coming September. We have seen no paper trail. We've seen no independent reports of toxicity within the school. We've seen no independent reports with regards to the trauma and how the school will be able to deal with the trauma of the children being directly under the tower. We've been told that they don't have to go out and play in the playground if they don't wish to in case of trauma. I'm sorry, how are we supposed to send children in North Kensington to a school that we don't know whether or not is contaminated?
Is that a firm decision that it should be reopened?
Well, if you go past the school, there is actually a sign on it saying that it will be, the children will be going back in September. The sixth form are currently going in one day a week. It just seems incomprehensible. I've got a 7.5-year-old child. We live in the catchment area. Dominic, you've said that you have young children. Would you be happy to send your children to that school without any evidence?
All right, let's just, thank you. Hold it there, and I'll come to you, Aditya, but let's just have a question from Natasha Elcott, please, because that does touch on the very point that you made. Natasha.
The Grenfell families have had to campaign for the last 11 months for their voices to be heard, whether that be around the inquiry or around the recent report today. Why is the government forcing them to make their voices heard?
It's the point that you think government or council, presumably, are not listening to you. Aditya.
I think Natasha's question is completely on point. Dominic Raab and his colleagues said today that they would consult on combustible cladding. Why then did we have to wait 10 months for an inquiry into combustible cladding and to other things to do with building regulation? They could have done that on day one. I should just say that I don't think Dame Judith Hackett was the right person to be running an inquiry like this. It's worth bearing in mind her own background. She was head of the Health and Safety Executive at a period when it underwent huge cuts. This was when David Cameron boasted that he was going to kill health and safety culture, don't forget. She then went on to work for the Engineers Association, Trade Association. So this is a classic case of revolving doors, and now she's giving a wishy-washy report in which she won't come down hard one way or the other. But the point is this: what we see is state failure upon state failure upon state failure. The state failed to protect people living in Grenfell and around Grenfell. The state failed again to help them when they most needed it, and the state is failing in the aftermath to learn any lessons from it. We're a year on, and as you say, completely correctly, the survivors have had to fight tooth and nail to even have a say in the public inquest.
Okay.
It's a joke.
Miller. Blames David Cameron for this.
Just a quick point. I've never met Dame Judith Hackett, but, you know, I did read that report, and it seems to me that it is pretty detailed, and it's got a lot of excellent recommendations in it. And one of the things it exposes is the outrageous behaviour of the building industry, which surely is partly to blame. And I think, as Dominic Raab said, it is a deeply technical issue. You know, of course it's technical. We just need to get on and send the right signals to people. And your point about the school is about transparency. One of the things that I feel strongly about, and actually the Hackett report says, is we should make fire risk assessments available. We should tell residents and we should tell schools what they are. And I think to keep those things secret from people is absolutely wrong.
Okay. Dominic, I'll come to you, but I'd just like to hear from Natasha Elcock, the background to your question, because were you a resident of...
Yeah, I'm a survivor from Grenfell Tower. The reason I asked that is because, as I say, the community spent the last 11 months, you know, campaigning and trying to get our voices heard. Pre-fire, the community was campaigning and trying to get their voices heard. After the fire, we're still doing that. And whilst, yes, you know, there has been decisions that have changed in most recent days, it's just disappointing that despite all the trauma that we're going through, a year on, we're still having to, you know, constantly be battling with local government, national government. It's just, you know, it's unbelievable. Everybody saw what happened that night. I mean, everybody in this room should have seen what happened that night because we're in Kensington and Chelsea. You know, most of the world saw what happened that night. But, you know, 11 months on, and, you know, Dominic's saying, yeah, we're sitting here in the audience as people that are going through trauma of living that night, 11 months on, why are we continuously having to be battled just to get the most basic things, such as a panel that should have been granted at the beginning, like many other big major inquiries have had. We've had to fight to get that. We're now fighting to ensure that people are safe in their homes, because no one will give us the answer that this type of cladding or cladding in general will be banned. You know, when, you know, Theresa May or the Prime Minister has granted there's going to be £400 million spent, but when's that going to happen? There's no time scales. It's just, you know, for me, there's no definitive answers about what, when or how. So we're still going to have to keep applying pressure to national, and then on top of that, we're still going to apply pressure onto local government to get people rehomed.
Right. What, when... Yes, Dominic Raab, what, when and how?
Look, I totally understand the weariness, the frustration. As I said, I've been doing this job since January. I've met with Grenfell United 5 times. I'm meeting them next week. We've met before. You know that if you ask me to do something, I'll throw myself at the challenge, whether it's in relation to the rehousing. I think we've made progress on some of the things like the principles on the future of the site so that your views are respected. We'll get this building regulation right. This report is worth reading.
But when? Well, that's the question. When? Because people still going to sleep tonight in buildings with cladding on, with fire wardens patrolling their estates to ensure they're safe. So when?
It depends which strand, but there's a lot of things that the community want and that they need to get this right. There's the future of the site, there's the building regulations, there's a public inquiry to get the facts, but to get them right. We've said that we'll start...
Can I just cut you? There's also a criminal investigation. We keep forgetting that bit.
Absolutely. And that's crucially important, and justice must be done, and the public inquiry must make sure justice is seen to be done. So we're already starting to work on the guidance, the so-called approved document B, which makes sure that the regulatory guidance is clearer. We're going to go out for consultation on that. That's what you have to do if you want to get it right. We've made the commitment on combustible cladding. The building, the social housing green paper will go out for consultation by July. I was down at Grenfell United to host a workshop with the tenants to get their views. I want you to be at the heart of this, but it will take a bit of time, and I know how weary you all are, but all I can say is I will keep meeting with you. Nick Hurd and I, the Grenfell Victims Minister, will keep making sure your voice is heard, and I'm sorry it's taken this long. This is tough, but we want to get it right for you.
But can I just ask you one thing? You keep saying, I just came into this job in January. What happened in the 6 months between June last year and January when you took this job, which is what she's complaining about?
Well, I wasn't there, so I don't know firsthand, but for example, on the relocations, I think one of the advantages, by the way, of coming into this halfway through is that I know how weary you all feel, but actually, there's been a lot of progress on things. Not fast enough, not the way you want it, but actually, I think that you've come a long way. You've certainly proved an inspiration to me. I'm proud and honoured to be working for you, but we have made progress. We've made progress on the principles around the future of the site, on the relocations. We've got the building regulations report out, and we've had the workshops and had your voice heard on social housing. All of these things matter, but they do take a bit of time.
A couple more points. The woman in the middle there, and then I'll come to you up there. Yes, the woman right in the middle of the audience.
My question is, I've been on site since the 4th day of the fire, and I was there helping. Now, in July, Sajid Javid set up the Grenfell Recovery Task Force, which was sanctioned. It was asked to provide guidance, strategic support, advice to the local community and to the council. It's holding up a mirror to the council. How does the panel, how seriously do you take the actions of this recovery task force that is delivering? Back in July, it said, we will keep the community at the heart of all we do. How is that translating? Because you can hear the voices from the community. That's clearly not happening.
All right.
Do you?
Dan Abbott?
The Recovery Task Force has done some work, and one of the things it's pointed out is the failings of the local authority at every stage. It's all very well for Dominic to say, we've come a long way, the people of Grenfell are inspiration to me. They don't actually care whether they're inspiration to you or not. What they want is to be moved into permanent homes, and what they want is something done about this inflammable cladding.
And we're doing all of those things.
Okay, and the man in the second row from the back there. No, that's woman, sorry, yes, you. Yes.
Coming back to cladding, there is a suspicion that the reason, the cladding, combustible cladding, has not been banned is the implication of the plastics industry in all of this and levels of profit that will actually be implicated if you ban this. Why would you not ban something which has been identified at Grenfell as being like covering a building with 30,000 litres of petrol?
Okay.
Why would you not ban it?
And you up there. The man up there on the right-hand side. Yes.
Does the panel agree with the Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell when he said that the victims had been murdered?
Who wants to take that on?
Well, we don't know, do we? What we know is that obviously...
Murdered, he said, by political decisions that were taken over decades.
I would say that the reason you're having a public inquiry, as long as it's taken, and I agree it would be better had it started early, but it hasn't, we are where we are, is to get to the facts. And from the facts, you find out who did what, who didn't do what, and from that you decide whether or not, if it's negligence, or whether the negligence is so bad it's a criminal act, or is it a corporate criminal act? So I think that's what you've got to wait for. So if we can pronounce what we don't like, but none of us have got the facts other than the terrible outcome that 71 people lost their lives. So until we get those facts, I'm afraid it's very hard to make those decisions.
Yes.
Just directly to your point about murder, Engels in Manchester in the 19th century wrote about he saw people who would die as a result of horrific factory accidents, and he realised actually it wasn't necessarily an accident. It was actually interested the factory owner to have things run in such a ramshackle way because he didn't have to pay for it. He didn't have to pay for their safety. And the thing is this, is that when you get a situation like Grenfell, which is a result of massive deregulation, of austerity and of top-down contempt, then yes, it is social murder. That is what happened to those people.
And do you accept what McDonnell said, which was that political decisions that were taken over decades,
I agree
but
with
it wasn't a sudden...
Yeah.
Not a
the
sudden...
gentleman asked about why didn't Labour do something about cladding. I think the gentleman was completely right in asking that as well.
And the woman there, and then I think we'll move on. Yes.
I agree with it being social murder because the people of Grenfell, for the longest, they were trying to get people to take their concerns seriously. They even made a blog about it, and what happened? They got threatened with legal action if they didn't take the blog post down, and naturally, with the fighting spirit of Grenfell, they didn't. And the people that did that are now gone. They're dead. Sorry.
Okay.
No fault of their own, they're gone. And I feel like the people in power are only dealing with it because they have to, not because they want to, not because they truly want to get the people responsible for their life, for 72 people, not 71, 72 people, 72 lives being taken. And I don't feel that they care. They don't know, only doing it because of the public pressure that's been put on them. Not because they need to do and right their wrongs. They should be bending over backwards to right the wrongs that have been occurring for so long. All this deregulation has culminated into one of the worst days of my life, and many people here too. So I don't, yeah, it's just murder. Sorry, but it is.
Well, we have other questions to go to, so I think we might move on to those. Just before we do, we're halfway through question time tonight. We're going to be in Worthing next Thursday. The week after that, we're going to be in Perth. And if you want to come to the programme, the details of how to apply are on the screen there. Let's take this from Georgia Smith-Marr, please.
Will the Israeli government be held accountable for their crimes against Palestine?
This it takes us... All right. 60 Palestinians were killed on the 70th anniversary of the Palestinians being pushed into the Gaza Strip, and when the American embassy was being opened at the same time, and that's what the question refers to. Aditya, you start on this.
What we saw this week was a massacre akin to the Sharpeville massacre, where you had people protesting and throwing stones, and in return they were met with the fire from sniper rifles. It's horrific. You could talk about Israel, but I actually want to think for a moment about Britain and Britain's role in all of this, because Britain approves the sales of arms to the Israeli army every year. We sell them sniper rifles, just like the ones that we use upon those protesters. We sell them assault rifles, we sell them bits of helicopters, fighter jets, all the rest of it. Last year alone, we approved a sale of £200 million in arms exports. I think it's high time that we reviewed the sale of those arms, and we asked ourselves whether we should actually be using them for the sake of internal repression. Internal repression and selling arms for the sake of internal repression is banned under international guidelines.
And this would be your version of holding them accountable to stop those arms supplies?
It's something that we can do here.
All right, Dominic Raab, what do you think we can or should do, or whether anything should be done?
Well, look, first of all, I think absolutely horrific to see 58 people die and thousands lose their life because of the use of live ammunition. I used to be a lawyer, an international lawyer, law of armed conflict. I worked in the Hague on war crimes. Israel has the right to defend itself, has a right to exercise self-defence, but as a matter of law and morality, it must, it must be done proportionately, and if it's under attack.
Shut up.
And if it's
Wait
under
a minute,
attack.
let him speak.
And what the Prime Minister has said, and the
afterwards.
UK's position, is that we need an independent fact-finding inquiry. The Israelis say that these are all Hamas militants brandishing weapons, and obviously the Palestinian view is very different. All I know from my experience is that when you've got 58 dead and thousands wounded, this seems like a disproportionate response, and we need to get all the facts, and I do think it is deeply, deeply troubling, and I'm pleased the Prime Minister has called internationally for an independent fact-finding inquiry.
And how could or should the Israeli government, if you have that fact-finding inquiry, be held accountable? I mean, stopping arms sales, as Aditya mentions?
There are all sorts of mechanisms that you've got at the diplomatic level, at the sanctions level. They're not a member of the International Criminal Court, so you couldn't have people being sent there for that. But I think there's the usual mechanisms you have in this way, whether it's sanctions, whether it's diplomatic measures, and depending on what the outcome of the fact... I mean, I think you need to get to the bottom of the facts first. and find out what the truth is between the two sides of it. But it looks, on any account to me, like a totally disproportionate use of force.
All right. The woman there in the centre, the spectacles. Yes.
Okay, I get your point. It's not like black and white, but I'm not just referring to the crimes that have happened like in the past week. I'm referring to the fact that the Israeli government keeps essentially what is kicking out Palestinian families who have lived there for over 50 years because they are taking over the land, leaving Palestinians nowhere to go. Like, it's more than just the murder, it's everything.
Bernard Hogan, Howe.
Horrific, what we all saw. We saw some parts of what happened, and that so many people died and so many people were injured. I would have liked to see the Israeli government say that they wanted to have an investigation, because I think, you know, you say on the face of it, it looks disproportionate, and they didn't say that. And I think if we'd been in this country, by now we would have decided we wanted to get to the facts. So that's really disappointing. You have to put in the mix the fact that obviously this wasn't just stone throwing, it was 40,000 people. And it is said that just, you know, a very short distance away, there were Israelis in villages who were in fear of their lives. And this was at a border. So something has got to be done to stop that sort of... I accept that some people may not find what I'm saying popular, but you've got to accept that people are going to try and protect people.
But you've been in that business as head of the Met. You've dealt with angry crowds and mobs. Do you need live ammunition to do that?
Well, you don't... You don't in this country, but we're not talking about this country. We're talking about an area where there's a terrible, terrible conflict. The major thing that does need to happen, which is what's being called for, is an independent international investigation, and the Israeli government should support that, because if there is a clear explanation for some of what happened, then they ought to be able to explain. They say that there were things happening that they had to intervene in because either firearms were involved or because people are in danger of losing their lives. So they should be able to prove that. Okay. But we all ought to see those facts.
You, sir, with glasses on the middle there, yes.
Actually, yesterday on Palestinian TV, one of the Palestinian Hamas leader actually admitted that 50 of the dead were Hamas members. 53. All right, 50 from Hamas, 3 from the Islamic Jihad. At the end of the day, I think, thank you very much for your intervention, because it's true. When you have 40,000 people amassed on the border with villages 400 meters behind you, what were the Israeli soldiers supposed to do? This was not a peaceful protest. They tried to go to the border. This is not a momentum meeting here. Everybody can think about other things, okay? I'm sorry, we allowed other opinion.
Right? Can I just add one thing, which is just that with this, there's going to be another protest apparently on the 4th of June. And if I was the Israeli military or the police, I would want more options than they clearly had on that day. They did use different options apart from lethal force, but I think they certainly have done better options than what happened on that day.
All right, and you in the third row, the woman there. Yes.
We're talking about the use of... Dominic, you said that Israel has the right to defend themselves. But how can you say killing 13 people with sniper rifles that... We have provided sniper rifles, I'm not saying the same ones, but we are providing weapons and they're killing children. How can you say that's proportionate and that's defensive?
Okay. Well, in fairness, I didn't say that.
The man in the orange tie there, and then I'll come to you in front. Yes.
Just on a point that you said, and on a point which Mr Chakrabarty said, how can the UK be responsible for... We ship weapons there, but are we responsible for their use? I mean, if we didn't send them there, another nation would be. And we can't be held responsible for what they're being used for. If they're being used in legitimate self-defence, right, the UK cannot be held responsible for that.
Diane Abbott. Diane Abbott.
I think that what we would all
hold on a second.
Like
Sorry, wait a minute, Dan, I'll come to you.
Yeah.
What were you saying? No, wait a minute, what were you saying?
So the border is illegal, first of all, and nobody is saying that Hamas have the right to kill people. What people are saying is that... Can you be quiet, man? Can you be quiet?
Just speak one at a time.
Can you be quiet? Men, please, be quiet, let me speak, yeah? First of all, it's an illegal border. Secondly, the Palestinian people have their poultry, their olive trees, their cattle, their children, their 14-year-old boys that wet themselves at night time, that wear nappies, because they're frightened that the IDF are going to come in and take them in the middle of the night. That land is illegal.
All right. And now Yes.
What do they
All right, well, now I'll give him a chance to reply to you.
Here's one of the real problems we have. This gentleman here is a journalist, and he stood here on national television and claimed that they were only throwing stones. They have rocket launchers. They have Kalashnikovs. No, not the babies. Excuse me. Hang on. And now you talk about proportionality. Proportionality is not, oh, they've got less weapons than we. This summer, the police were praised for shooting down 3 jihadists in a few minutes, as they should have been praised for doing. Those jihadists only had knives. The British police didn't throw down their gun and have a knife fight with them. That's not proportionality. Proportionality is using the necessary amount of force to control the situation. Their border, thousands of people are trying to breach the border as cover for militants who have every intention, hang on, who have every intention of murdering Jews. They have posted maps of routes to kibbutzes and villages. The intention is to get into Israel and murder as many civilians as possible. Right. And anybody who thinks that they could do a better job should explain. Perhaps you could go and tell the Israelis how to do it more safely. I'm sure they would appreciate it.
I think what we'd all like to see is peace in the region. And I would query whether this type of disproportionate use of force, and it does, on the face of it, seem disproportionate, is going to help to achieve the negotiations we want to have and peace in the region. And that's why, to know exactly what happened, why we needed independent inquiry. But it seems on the face of it like an atrocity. And let me just say one small thing about the role of Donald Trump. Because what we had was photographs of his daughter opening the new American embassy in Jerusalem, where no other European country has an embassy, side by side with photographs of dead Palestinians. I don't think that Donald Trump has played a positive role. We want an inquiry to establish the facts, but in the end, we want to move towards a peace process and peace in the region for the benefit of both Israeli children, but also for the benefit of Palestinian children.
Actually, the question was whether the Israeli government would be held accountable. And I heard you say that we can't compare this to Britain, this is a different country. Can I just remind you, we're actually talking about humans. Lives have been lost. It's sounding very similar, actually, to the conversation we were just having about Grenfell. When lives are lost, people need to be held accountable.
Camilla Cavendish, I'll come back to you. Camilla Cavendish.
Look, I think we all know that lives are being lost on both sides. And what happened on Monday was... Hang on, would you let me finish? No, I'm not talking about Monday. I'm talking about for years. I'm talking about years. We're talking about... Israel was founded, what, 70 years ago? For the last 20 years, we've had virtually no progress towards peace. And one of the huge mistakes I think Donald Trump has made, not only did he provoke, do something unbelievably provocative by opening that embassy in Jerusalem. He didn't even ask for anything in return. And we can talk about Britain, but the truth is, we all want peace in that region. The only country that's going to really effectively broker peace is the US. We have a president in the US who seems to have shared responsibility for that, and what he could have done, I don't think he should have opened that embassy at all. But what he could conceivably have done with an Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has already said he doesn't want a two-state solution, he could have forced some real concessions. He could have asked him to remove some of the settlements. He could have asked him to come to the table. And I'm unfortunately, in having failed to do that, he is leaving, I think, extremists in both Hamas and the Israeli government to continue to escalate a conflict. It's very hard to see the way out of it.
You at the very back there. All right.
Can I just say... Yeah. Can I just say, people like Dominic, who says Israel has the right to defend itself, yes, it does, but the Palestinians have a right to defend themselves, right? And you talk about selling arms to Israel. What you guys don't do with Israel is what you've done with Grenfell, just deregulate, it's just giving things that you shouldn't be giving to people. And what you're doing right now is you're actually saying it's okay to do it. You should stop the arms sales to Israel, make sure there's aid going to the children that are being shot. And I'm not being funny, these people are getting kicked out of their house. They've got no bread and water. They have to defend themselves. They need bread and water. And you keep saying it's Hamas, it's this, it's that. It's all Israel. And the first thing Netanyahu tweeted as soon as Trump was in charge, that is it, no two-state solution. Israel never wanted a two-state solution. They want an actual greater Israel project, and they don't want nothing to do with Palestinians. They want to clear them all. And it's people like you who's a disgrace to the two-state solution.
And you, sir.
I'd like to make 2 points. First of all, how can you have peace in the Middle East when one of the sides does not want to negotiate, doesn't even want to recognise the other side? And secondly, how is it that the aggressors always seem to project themselves as victims?
Bernard, you wanted to come back in?
Yeah, just, I think it's a fair challenge about, you can compare the fact that obviously people died, and that's the same wherever it happens in the world. My point is that in terms of the question I was asked, which is about how the police respond, we're different here, as it would be in America, where they have 300 million guns in society, and in Israel and the Middle East, where I'm afraid quite a lot of it is militarised already. Okay. Now, whether you like that or not, that's the situation they face. So that's why I say it's a different answer in different parts of the world. The law remains the same.
Amy Ling, let's have your question, please. Amy Ling.
My cousin was brutally stabbed last weekend in a random attack by a group of young people. It was about a 30-minute walk from here, so pretty local. What action is being taken to address the increase in youth violence?
What action is being taken to address the increase in youth violence? Well, Bernard, back to you perhaps on this.
Well, first of all, clearly, sadly, an awful lot more people have died this year through stabbing or shooting, and mainly young men. I think, first of all, I'm going to say something that's one of these things that you have to look at, but is not really the short-term answer. There's certainly, in certain parts of London, there are more young people than, we've got, as a society, we're getting older, but in the northeast of London, it's getting younger. And sadly, when we see more young men, we have seen more crime generally. I think that's some of what explains it. It doesn't explain all of it, but there's something there that we've got to address and we've got to think about. More importantly, the causes, I suspect, are twofold. One is that it's drug dealing, and the other is that clearly too many people are carrying knives. And so both are going to have something done about them. I think we saw a report this week that said that drugs are now not... it's the street dealing that caused this type of problem. And it's not now that the buyers go to the sellers. It gets delivered on mopeds, and you apparently can get drugs quicker than you can a pizza. But something's got to be done about that. And so therefore what's got to happen is that obviously the people who are committing those offences need to be arrested, and where you can, you identify the people carrying knives and make sure that they get locked up. And if the message needs to get sent stronger, and it might, by sentencing, then a severe prison sentence. At the moment it's 6 months on a second offence. And I would argue it probably needs to be more.
Is any of this being done, though? You say it's got to be done, which is obvious. If you've got knives, you want to get rid of knives.
Well, if you look at people trading in drugs... I think what the Met's done over the last few weeks, they've moved about 300 officers into these areas. They're doing more stop searches. So they are doing their best in what is a pretty difficult circumstance. The final thing I would say, now the government won't like to hear this, but you're going to have to spend some more money on policing. And the reason for that is because if you end up in this city... But if you end up in this city with only 29,000 cops, not 32,000... Let me just finish the point.
Hold on a second. Just let him finish his point.
Let me just finish the point.
Wait a minute. No, let him finish his point,
which is simple, really, which is that if you lose the number of police when the city's getting bigger and you have this sort of problem, it's very hard to make sure that you attack it. So I would say that you need to spend more money on policing. It seems a bit odd that when the NHS has more demand, we spend £8 billion on it. When we have more crime, we spend less money on the police. Doesn't make a lot of sense. The final point, the government doesn't even have to spend more money from anywhere else. There's about £350 million sat in a transformation fund. There's about 1% going out of the police in terms of the apprentice fund. They can't get anything back because they're not recruiting. These are very clear opportunities to spend about £500 million on what, in this city alone and other cities around the country, needs to have money spent on.
There are lots of hands up here, but please wait. Let Dominic Raab have his say, because he represents the government here, and then I'll come to those of you who've got your hand up. Dominic Raab.
I think there's two dimensions to this. On the law enforcement side, we're catching more people carrying a blade. They're being prosecuted than ever before, and they spend longer in prison. But I don't think law enforcement is the sole answer. And when I first became an MP, I started volunteering, and I later became a trustee of Fight for Peace. It's a boxing and martial arts charity in Newham. It's got a groundbreaking record. I've seen it firsthand, taking troubled kids from the wrong sides of the track, and with the competitive sport, but also with help with their maths and their English, and a youth leadership course, giving them a sense of self-esteem and giving them a sense of purpose and direction. I would love to see the Mayor of London put a bit more support into those kind of charities. Law enforcement's part of the answer, but also we need to give those young people opportunities that perhaps in their early life they haven't had.
And what about spending money on the police? as Bernard Hogan Howe says.
Well, there's no hydraulic relationship. Cressida Dick has said that, but we have protected the police budget since 2015. There's 460 million extra going in this year, if you include from the local precept. So money is part of the challenge there. I don't deny that. But actually, if you look at the data, law enforcement is doing an increasingly good job of catching and punishing. It needs to be multifaceted. It needs to be dealing with the causes as well as trying to deal with the problems.
Dominic, I'm afraid I can't, get away with the fight. Well, I was there. Our budget started at 3.6 billion. We lost 600 million. And the next threat is 400 million. The gap that's being filled in London is the Mayor's put 155 million in. Now, I'm not here to make party political points, but it's not reasonable to say the government's protected the police other than counter-terrorism.
No,
we're not talking about counter-terrorism.
Sorry, Bernard. I didn't say since we've been in 2010. We have a deficit to deal with. We've got to live within our means, otherwise we don't have money for all the precious public services for the long term. I made the point that since 2015 we'd protected the police budget. Money is part of the problem, but it's not the sole solution. And actually, there are local authorities and great local charities doing great work, and we need to give hope to some of these youngsters, as well as focusing on the law enforcement side of things.
Just to come back on Dominic, actually we've got fewer police now than we did at any time in England and Wales than we did at any time since the late 90s. The austerity decade really has cut into police numbers. But the other thing that austerity's done is it's had two other big socio-economic effects that we'll all know from living in London. One is that council budgets have been slashed, so things like youth clubs, all kinds of youth amenities. All kinds of youth amenities have been cut or closed. What Dominic says about, actually it's not just about policing, that actually we need to start early in the process. We need to stop kids going into gangs, stop kids thinking about knives. He's completely right. It's just that his government has cut the funding by which we would do that. That's the problem. The other thing I want to say, which is a direct result of the austerity that we've seen, is that if you look at the kind of jobs and the kind of economy that we've got now in big cities, the growth of zero-hours contracts, the growth of temporary agency contracts, means that parents increasingly having to work 2 or 3 jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. So they are not around to look after their kids either. Put the 3 together, and it's no surprise that we're in the sort of situation that you're describing, where people can get stabbed for no good reason, just for walking on their way home.
OK. And now, a lot of you had your hands up. I'm going to come to the other people on the panel who haven't spoken, but I want to go back to Amy Ling, who asked the question originally. What do you think of what you've heard so far?
I agree with a lot of the comments. I think there do need to be more police visible on the street. There needs to be, as you said, Dominic, we need to have more charities recognising the youth sector, but they need the money. Like, they can't do their work without the money. And I think, much like the other conversations we've had, it's the poor people who are being forgotten, and it would be acted on much quicker if it was happening in a more affluent area.
All right, and the woman there in the stripe, and I come to those of you who wanted to speak, and yes, you in the striped shirt there.
I was going to say, well, I think we need to look at where the teenagers and young people spend most of their time, and that's in schools. And I know firsthand that actually school budgets are being slashed left, right and centre. So one of the places where there could actually be interventions as a teacher, I know, those are going, because we don't have the time to do those, because we have a far higher timetable and far less free time to actually run those interventions.
What kind of interventions would you want to make as a teacher if you had the time?
Well, in my school, there were loads of we had loads of counsellors, and we had like different social mentors who would come in, and a lot of that's being cut. A lot of the stuff that happens that's not necessarily lessons, so like internal areas, those are being reduced because there's less staff for those. All of the places that look for students who are who might be at risk, those areas are being cut, and I don't think that schools are being supported at all to kind of deal with external pressures.
All right, and you, sir. Hold on a second. OK.
Why is it I can walk into my Waitrose here in London, there's no tags on knives or anything, but then when I go to Bath and I go to the Waitrose there, I literally can't take the knife off the thing without going to a counter, and so it's the supply. I'm talking about, it would be one step that we could make very easily just to reduce this supply.
The knives are too easily available in London, you say?
Yeah, they're not normal knives. I mean, some of these pictures of the knives you see are enormous.
What are you laughing at? Sorry, you're all speaking at once. It's because he goes to Waitrose. Camilla Cavendish. All right, Camilla Cavendish.
I'm not going to address that point, if you don't mind.
No, let's leave Waitrose out of it and deal with the knives.
Waitrose out of it. Look, I think I wanted to make a different point about social media, because it seems to me that, and I was talking to some social workers today because I chair a charity called Frontline, which puts great graduates into social work, into child social work, and they deal with this every day. And what they are seeing is more kids who are not in gangs, but who are taking knives to school because they're scared. And they don't necessarily want to use those knives, but this is what's happening. It's the escalation of fear, which is, of course, starting with the gangs. But the other thing they told me, which you may all know, is that there's now a huge amount of videos on social media. There are gangs who are posting videos on YouTube. There's a lot of rap videos. There's a lot of glamorizing of this stuff. And I don't see why, given that we're trying to crack down on a lot of other social media postings, we shouldn't do something about that as well, because that is part of this growing culture that is making a lot of kids very, very scared, and whether they're going to Waitrose or not to buy the knives, they are taking those knives in.
All right. Diane Abbott, you are Shadow Home Secretary. One day you may have to deal with exactly these problems. How would you answer the points that have been raised?
Well, first of all, I would answer Dominic, who said this is all about drug dealing. A lot of these young people that get stabbed and shot are in that, drug dealers and on the fringes of it. But it's really not true to say that every young person that gets stabbed in London is a drug dealer. I visited it's really not true. I visited
it was Birmingham, not me. Birmingham said it, not me.
And I didn't say it either.
Yeah.
Oh, they both say they didn't say
well,
it.
I confused the two of them.
I said something, but wasn't that they're all drug addicts?
But let me say again, it's really unfair to say that every single young person in London who gets stabbed is a drug dealer, because that's simply not true.
No one's saying that.
All right.
But the point I want to make is this. This is a short-term issue and a long-term issue. I can see someone laughing, but I've had to visit families of children who've been stabbed, and they are broken in pieces, and you need to remember that. It's a short-term issue and a long-term issue. The short-term is what we've heard about: more law enforcement, and Cressida Dick has said she's going to have more policemen in the areas, she's going to have more stop and search. But the long-term issue is about putting money into the youth service and the type of projects which will divert these young people from crime. And when you talk about the police budget, an important role for the police, where they have the numbers, is to actually engage with communities, to get information, to find out what's going on. But because actually the government hasn't protected the police budget, and because there are fewer policemen, that very important role for the police, apart from law enforcement, isn't happening.
We have to end.
On the one hand, we need better law enforcement. On the other hand, we need to put money into youth services.
All right, and I'm sorry you have your hands up. We have to stop because we've had our hour. Apologies to you, apologies to anybody who wants to get in on that, but our time is up.